But tonight what we're going to do is we're going to go to Exodus 33, and we'll look at Moses' plead for God to be with them as they go into to Canaan. But we're also going to be going to, let's see how far we want to get. We may go to Numbers chapter 10 and chapter 11 as we look at this as well and look at some more from Moses. But we'll start in Exodus 33. And notice, this is when the journey is resuming. This is after everything that we have gone through last week in chapter 2. And here in chapter 33, after, and we remember, let me make this note first before we go on. We remember that when Moses goes to the Lord to plead on their behalf, he pleads for mercy, but also for justice. And when we go before the Lord, that needs to be our prayer as well. We can't just pray for mercy, but without justice, right? God still is righteous. He cannot be in the presence of sin. He will not allow it. And so we need to be praying that not only will we be forgiven, but that the Lord will purify us as well. And so that needs to be a part of our prayer life as well. Not just the forgiveness, but also the purification. Moses had that in mind as well. All right, another intercession here in chapter 33. Let's pick up in verse number 8. And it came about, whenever Moses went out to the tent, that all the people would arise and stand, and each at the entrance of his tent, and gaze after Moses until he entered the tent. Whenever Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. When all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all of the people would stand and worship, each at the entrance of his tent. So the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face. Look at this, guys. Just as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses returned to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Now we talked about that element of preparation. We talked about that a little bit Sunday night as well, where we looked at the relationship that Elijah and Elisha had. There was almost that mentor relationship was there, and we see hints of this with Moses and Joshua. Joshua was with Moses. We remember back as we looked at our context, he went with Moses the first time up to the mountain. Now, he didn't go all the way up, but he went with him on the journey part of the way. And no doubt Moses was pouring into him, and he was learning as he went. Joshua's still doing that here. But don't you just love that? That it says that the Lord spoke to Moses as a man speaks to his friend. Wow. And we get from other places in context where the Lord was talking to Aaron and Miriam, I believe. And what was it that he says? Well, I talked to Moses as a friend. You guys, I don't have that relationship with. Now, that's something that I think we have in our relationship with God over what a lot of the people in the Old Testament had. Now, we see it with some figures, right? We see it with Moses here. But guys, we get to go before God in prayer and speak to Him in a very personal way. What a great blessing that is. You know, we don't have to go to the Holy of Holies. We don't have to go to the temple. We can go to God in prayer. And that's something we should be thankful for. But Moses has that type of a relationship with God. It's something we should strive for as well. And then here it is, verse number 12. This is the first one that we'll look at tonight. Then Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people. But you yourself have not let me know whom you will send with me. Moreover, you have said, I have known you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now then, if I have found favor in your sight in any way, please let me know your ways, so that I may know you, in order that I might find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people." And he said, "My presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest." Then he said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here." This conversation between Moses and God is fascinating for a plethora of reasons. And before we get to that, let me make one more note of that passage before. Keep in mind, the people were seeing God's work continuously. When Moses goes into the tent, they see this pillar come down of a cloud of smoke, right? And they're watching this literally take place. And so, you know, we read that, and sometimes we just shake our heads when we think, how could this people in their faith in God when they see things like that taking place right before their very eyes? And that's a question that we ponder from time to time, and we'll probably continue to look at as we go through this, because we'll have to look at some of the prophets as well as we go through this and their prayers to the Lord. But and we see some of the same relationships there. But let's go back. Notice this, what Moses says. Let's go back to verse 13. Now then, if I have found favor in your sight in any way, please let me know your ways, so that I may know you, in order that I might find favor in your sight. Consider, too, that this nation is your people. Moses is talking to the Lord, as the text mentions, as he would talk to a friend. And he's asking, Lord, guide me, right? He wants to make sure that he is doing the things to walk in a right manner before the Lord. And that's what he's asking him there in verse 13. And we see it bleed over to 14. And he said, this is the Lord speaking, my presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest. There's some significance there as well, and we're going to see it as we get to our passages in Numbers. We're going to see it as we get to our passages later on as Moses is judging the people, and we could go back in Exodus as well and look at some of that. But do you think Moses would have been overwhelmed at times by his what was going on? I think so. Absolutely. Moses would have been overwhelmed at times by what was going on and the responsibility that was on him. And so he understands something here in verse 14 that I think is, in 15, that's very important. God assures him, my presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest. This had to be very assuring to Moses. Then verse 15, then he said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here. Guys, Moses gets it. I can't do it alone. Lord, we cannot do this without you. We don't have a shot outside of you. And there's all kinds of other directions we could go with this and look at it in more detail. But God needed to go with the people. Verse 16, for how then can it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not that by your going with us, so that we, I, and your people may be distinguished from all the other people who are on the face of the earth? The Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing of which you have spoken, for you have found favor in my sight, and I have known you by name. Then Moses said, please show me your glory. Wow. I mean, so things escalate very quickly here, right? This conversation between Moses and God. Moses is asking for things. Lord, be with us. Lord, guide us. Go with us as we leave this place. We need you. And then, what is it that Moses asked here? Please show me your glory. And he said, I myself will make all of my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show compassion to whom I will show compassion. He further said, you cannot see my face, for mankind shall not see me and live. Then the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me, and you shall stand there on the rock, and it will come about, while my glory is passing by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. This is just an incredible moment in the Scripture. Can you imagine what's going through Moses' mind in this scenario where he is discussing this with God? Lord, I want to see you. I have this relationship with you, and it seems like he's wanting to continue in this relationship, right? And the Lord has this plan that he puts into place here where Moses is able to see as much of him as he would reveal to him. Take note that, we have recorded in the text that when Moses would be speaking with God, going into the tent, when he would come out, his face would shine. The people took note of that. They would notice that Moses, his disposition had changed. There was a visible difference in Moses when he had been with the Lord, and they were astonished by those things. And so imagine even so much more so this interaction that Moses has with God, where he gets to see as much of God as God would allow. I mean, this is just incredible. Now, you're thinking, Spencer, we don't have this in our prayer life today. But also, let me say this. Moses had a special relationship with God in this sense. But we also don't need to take for granted our relationship with God and what He has allowed for us to see in prayer. And through His Word as well, right? God has His words recorded for us. We have access to them. We have knowledge of them through reading them. And we can understand the mind of God through His text, or at least as much as we are able to, right? In our own human condition. But I just find this fascinating. 138 words there in the Hebrew. This prayer, we're going to, I guess, label it a prayer. This conversation that Moses has with God, pleading with God, please go with us as we go on this journey. In essence, we can't do it without you, Lord. And that attitude that we have seen time and time again of Moses, it shines through once again very much here. Any comments on this? Maybe things that I have missed? Countless things. We could spend months on this passage. But we're just kind of bringing some of this stuff to the surface tonight. What do y'all think?
Seems to be that Moses is like a little bit scared that God's not going to be with him after all that's been. And he just wants that assurance that God's going with him. And sometimes we run into that in our prayer life. You ask God for something and you're like, I got to do this, but I want to make sure you're with me. I want to make sure that you give me the right answers and the way to do it. And that kind of deal, and then I'm doing it the right way, and so kind of we doubt ourselves sometimes as He's doing that here.
I agree with you, and also we're going to look at this in more detail. How do we know that something is from God? Isn't that a question? And I think you brought that up, your friend who said at one point, oh, the Lord has led me to do this. Well, how can we have assurance in that? That's a whole nother conversation that's going to be had, right? So we'll get to that in more detail in a future class, hopefully before you leave, because I know we were having that conversation. But I do find it interesting here, and we do see that Moses is, I'm not going to say that Moses is cracking under the pressure, because I don't believe that to be the case, because God is with him through all of this. But we know that it's mounting on Moses, right? The people's complaining, and it's continuous, as we're going to look at in Numbers coming up. This complaining of the people, the Scripture calls it murmuring. And in the original language, and I wish I had written that down, and I might have, but it's like, it's not just complaining under the breath. It had gotten to the point where it's just full-on complaining against God. God, what, you've brought us out to die? That's the sentiment that we saw from the people, right? Think back to Egypt, we had things in Egypt. We had good food in Egypt. We had safety in Egypt, and the people looked back to a time that they were captive. Do you guys think that Christians look back to a time that they were captive to sin? Think about that. Do we look back to times that we were children of the devil? Man, things were a lot easier then. I didn't have to worry about this moral weight that sits on my chest sometimes. There's Christians all the time that seem to look back and even relish, sadly, their former life before they had Christ. But God had provided for them, and they weren't willing to realize it. Now, we'll expand on that in the future.
Moses has come a long way, too, because like I said earlier, God was just about ready to kill him when he was, we're talking not even 40 years in here. This has just been a few years since God was ready to kill him and had to talk him into coming and doing this, and till now where he's got such a relationship with God. It's kind of cool that after God showed him with all the signs that he did in Egypt that Moses came this far that quick, because
it is. It's to see the transformation of Moses in his relationship with God. He's seeing that God is faithful. He is walking with him in this. And as we looked at, alluding to what you were talking about, it may escape me what I was about to say, but it'll probably come back to me here in just a moment.
It's kind of amazing that these people didn't come this far. Like Moses came this far. Why did you think that if we were there, we would have done that? But I can't believe that we're any different than they are. But
Absolutely.
They saw all these miracles that they didn't have to lift a finger to go do what they
And so, okay, that kind of got me back on track with what I was thinking, but God even gave Moses the play script, right? He gave him the script about what was going to happen in Egypt. You're not going to have initial success with Pharaoh. And we've looked at that and mentioned that a couple times. But God even prepared him for the difficulties that were going to happen. You're not just going to walk into Pharaoh and he's going to let you go the first try. God gave Moses the playbook about what was going to happen. And so I think there was a lot of things that happened in those conversations with God that as Moses continued to grow, as you were mentioning, he is seeing that, okay, God is faithful in these promises, and he's continuing to build that relationship. Now, Moses is going to stumble. He's going to stumble, and we're going to look at that. Yes?
Just a little thing. All the places where it said favor, all those verses, in the King James it says grace.
I believe the word is charis there in the Greek, which we had done a study on. And so Moses had found favor in the sight of God, or grace in the sight of God. Now, we've gone into that recently as well. But make a note of that, because we're going to be coming back to that concept in our study of prayer. And we're going to have to, as we look at some of the grace that is afforded to us. Great thought, though. And that is an important distinction there, that Moses had found grace. Similar to the situation of Noah, right? Noah found grace. Same word is used there in the sight of God. And we see that word used, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but on many different occasions. We even see that word used when Jacob was trying to make a peace offering to Esau. It says that he was seeking favor, charis, or grace to be afforded to him from Esau. So there's a lot of interesting things that you could do with that and go with that. I appreciate you bringing that out. But Moses did have grace, find grace in the sight of God. That's very important to his relationship with God as well. Very important to our relationship with God. Any other thoughts on what we've looked at in Exodus before we move on to Numbers? The answer to this prayer was right in the passage. We've talked about the answer and where we have seen the answers to these prayers. Some of them have been in the Scripture even before the prayer was prayed, where God had said something, and it was in essence the answer to a prayer that would be prayed. Some of them were after. We can see evidence of that. Exodus 33:17, when the Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing of which you have spoken, for you have found favor in my sight, and I have known you by name. That's the answer to the prayer there. The Lord says he will do these things. And so, not a prayer in the traditional sense, but still a conversation with God. And that's what we're going to see as we continue through this age where God is having these direct conversations with people. But it still is important to our conversation today. Any other more thoughts on that? If not, let's go to Numbers chapter 10. That's will be our next one. We'll be at Numbers chapter 10 and 11. And we might actually get through this tonight. We're looking good. So I heard somebody earlier mention the timeline here. The timeline's about to become very important to the context, more so in chapter 11 than chapter 10. But we'll get there when we get there. Let's go chapter 10. Notice down here near the end of the chapter. Verse 32 is where we'll pick up. So it will be, if you go with us, that whatever good the Lord does for us, we will do for you. So they moved on from the mountain of the Lord 3 days' journey, with the ark of the covenant of the Lord going in front of them for the 3 days to seek out a resting place for them. And the cloud of the Lord was over them by day, and when they set out from the camp, and then it came about when the ark was set out that Moses said, this is the part we're looking at, rise up, Lord, and may your enemies be scattered, and those who hate you flee from your presence. And when it came to rest, he said, return, Lord, to the myriad of thousands of Israel. So what is it that Moses is petitioning or asking God about in this context? What do we think? What's going on here? I don't want to lecture somebody. I can. Trust me, we'll be here till midnight if I do that. transporting the Ark of the Covenant in this passage. And Moses asked the Lord that he will essentially give it a safe passage, a safe travel as they travel with it. Rise up, Lord, and may your enemies be scattered, right? He wants it to be scattered so that they can have safe passage through, and those who hate you flee from your presence. And then it gives the disclaimer here in 36, and when it had came to rest, right when this task had been complete, he returned, Lord, to the myriad thousands of Israel. So there's a prayer for both the transport, but then also whenever it comes to rest as well. We're going to spend most of our time in chapter 11, however, because what are we just talking about over in Exodus 32 and 33? The complaining of the people. And it comes to another head here in Numbers chapter 11. And it's going to incite a conversation between Moses and God. And this one goes a little bit differently. And there's some interesting components about it as well that just stick out to me that we'll look at when we get there. But notice this. Now when the people became like those who complain of adversary in the ears of the Lord, of adversity in the ears of the Lord, and the Lord heard them, and his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them, and consumed some at the outskirts of the camp. Okay, just here in verse 1, because of the complaining, the Lord's done with this by now. He has continued to provide for them. He has been long-suffering with them. And what does he do? He calls down fire. It says even here in the passage that, where is it? Fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some. Some of them died from this. All around the outskirts of the camp. Now, let's imagine this for a moment. Imagine we're in this camp. We hear the complaining, the murmuring against the Lord. And next thing you know, nothing but fire. Fire surrounds the camp. I mean, that would make me perk up. I don't know about you. I mean, right? Okay, let's not complain. I can think back to when we were going to Disney World. It seemed like the longest trip. You guys ever, any of y'all who've had kids or been around kids, I know this way more than me, and I am due for it to happen when it happens to me. But anybody ever hear the question, are we there yet? Man, doesn't that question wear on you? And I remember asking that so many times, and I remember that we listened to the same CD so many times that I can tell you exactly what song was next after each. And so, I was complaining big time on some of those trips when I was a child. And I look back to their actions here, and I would think, man, if something like this happened, I would have perked up, right? I would have started paying attention. And by the way, this is where the timeline's about to come in, so hold that thought. But let's get through a little bit more of this, and I'll make some comments on this. So the people then cried out, not to God. The people cried out to Moses. And Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died out. So the place was named Taberah. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. Now the rabble who were among them had greedy cravings. And the sons of Israel also wept again and said, who will give us meat to eat? Wait a second here. We just saw a consuming fire in verse 1, and now we're complaining not just about our circumstances, but we want meat to eat? Oh my. Greedy cravings, the scripture says here in verse 1. Does anybody have anything else there other than greedy cravings?
And fellow lusting.
Interesting. I looked up this term, and I wish I had written that down as well. There's so much stuff we could get into with this. But that term doesn't always seem to be strictly sinful in nature, but it is just almost this overcoming feeling, this overwhelming feeling. You ever walk into a bakery and you smell what smells so good, right? And it's just that craving overtakes you in those moments. Some of y'all are thinking about what you're going to eat after this now. But but that feeling overtook the people here. Greedy cravings, and some of them also wept. They're weeping over this. Who will give us meat to eat? Verse 5, we remember the fish which we used to eat for free in Egypt. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now our appetite is gone. There is nothing at all to look at except this manna. Wow. Somebody didn't learn their lesson, right? Somebody did not learn their lesson that they had just been taught. And by the way, I want to make this note now. From the time of Exodus 32, there's some ways we can go back and track this timeline. I know that when he goes up on Sinai, it makes a mention of the month, and I don't have that in my notes. But next week, I'm going to try to have a PowerPoint up of this timeline because it's going to be very important for this. But it tells us exactly when Moses goes up on the mountain. Here is all I've compiled on here. Here's all the events that have taken place since then. The golden calf in Moses' anger. The journey resumes there in Exodus 33 through 39. And then there comes this period where God is preparing them. That's what we're looking at right now. God is preparing them to go into the land. He's teaching them. He is showing them how to properly worship. He is showing them how to set up the tabernacle. The tabernacle is built and filled in Exodus chapter 40. Laws for sacrifice and offering, Leviticus 1 through 7. Aaron and his sons consecrated in Leviticus chapter 8 and 9. Nadab and Abihu, by the way, in Leviticus 10. Laws of purity would happen in, here in chapter 11 through 19. And then there's some more that goes on past this, and that is punishment and regulation, chapters 20 through 22. Feast and Jubilee, chapter 23. We get over to Numbers, the census, the tribes, the duties, tabernacle dedication. The people complain, as we're looking at here in Numbers. Chapter 11, the 12 spies coming up in chapter 13. And the people murmur again at the spies' report in chapter 14 and 15. Now, this is a lot of events. That's a lot of pages in our Bible. But it's only about a year. It's only about a year. And so that helps us put into perspective, right, what are these people complaining about? And specifically, since those events that had happened in the golden calf to where we are right here, we're only a couple months. There's only a couple months difference. And these people are, imagine back in Egypt, we have great food, right? But what did you have? What were you in Egypt? You were enslaved. That's the point I was trying to make earlier, right? People look back to a time where they were enslaved in sin, and they wish they had that. They're stupid. They're stupid. These people were very much like that. All right. I'm going to start preaching instead of teaching here.
Spencer,
Yes.
I just wanted to point out in verse 4, it's a very valuable verse to us because it demonstrates that the Egyptians left with the children of Israel, the mixed multitude. And if you notice, their complaining is what influences the weeping. And that's a good lesson for us too, that sometimes we can easily be led astray by people who do not believe in Christ and become discouraged. And so that always stands out to me in this passage here.
Absolutely. That's a great thought. And we can be discouraged if we're not careful. So that's a great warning for us. Back in verse, we're going to go and we'll follow that here soon. But let's go to verse 7. You know, they're talking about cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions. I mean, I could think of a cartoon of this, right? I think about being out in the desert or something, and you're thinking the mirage, right? All of the good things. And that seems to be what's going through the minds of the people here. And they're just so misled in this moment, led by their own desires. Verse 7, now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance like the bdellium. The people would roam about and gather it and grind it in between two millstones, or pound it into the mortar and boil it in the pot and make loaves with it. And its taste was like the taste of a cake baked with oil. When the dew came down on the camp at night, the manna would come down with it. So there's just a little excerpt there about the manna, and it's interesting there. The people had gotten a little creative over the time, hadn't they? They were grinding it, they were boiling it, they were doing all these different things with the manna. And there's the note there in verse 9 that when the dew came down on the camp, and we have that explained in greater detail in other passages, but it's just a notation here. And then we see Moses in verse 10. Now Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, each one at the entrance of his tent. And the anger of the Lord became very hot. And Moses was displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you been so hard on your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight, that you have put the burden of all of this people on me?" Being honest with you, I can kind of understand where Moses is coming from. Moses has to be sitting here thinking, guys, just in the past few days, there was fire. It killed some of you from the camp that was all outside because of your complaining, and now you're complaining about Moses is at his wit's end. And I can understand it. But Moses comes before God. Remember, he talked to him as he talks to a friend. It says that the Lord's anger became very hot. Now, we're going to see a difference here between how Moses interceded for the people in 32 versus how he intercedes for them here. We'll make a couple notes of that. Let's see how we're doing on time. We're doing okay. Let's go down and look at Moses' claim here. What burden? That you have put this burden of all of the people on me. Was it I who conceived all of these people? Or did I give birth to them that you should say to me, "Carry them in your arms as a nurse carries a nursing infant to the land which you swore to their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give to all of these people? For they weep before me, saying, 'Give us meat so that we may eat.' I am not able to carry all of this people by myself, because it is too burdensome for me. So if you're going to deal with me this way, please kill me now." Man. We feel that way sometimes. Wow. Please kill me now, if I have found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my misery. Moses is hurting here. He is very burdened by his leadership role and seemingly feeling alone in this. Now, I don't know the magnitude of the complaining of the people necessarily. I don't know the full scope of it. I assume there's probably some who are sticking to Moses. I'd like to think that the elders that are talked about, those wiser men that we looked at in Exodus, hopefully they're sticking by Moses at least, but we don't know fully. But Moses was really hurting in this situation. And notice that Moses in this, unlike the other passage where he says, "Lord, spare the people," right? He's just wanting an end to it. If it's not going to be, I don't want to say easy, but if it's going to have these difficulties. But we also talked about in that other passage how Moses was a type of Christ. He said, "Lord, basically, if you can't forgive them, punish me in their stead." That's an important theme that we'll see. 7:15, let me ring the bell. We'll continue. Any thoughts on what we've seen from Moses here in this communication with God? This is very different from what we've read before.
No, but I complain to God, and I'm seeing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
We-
not a prayer, that's a complaint.
We can feel that way, but we also know that we can bring those things before God, right? We have to talk with Him about these things.
Don't
And
you think that he would have given them whatever they wanted if they would have come to him in the right way? If they would have been thankful for what they had and maybe asked for something, that he would have been a whole different attitude. And we got to learn that today, because like she was just saying, a lot of times we're like, "Why are you putting me through this? Why should I have to do this, Lord?" And we don't look at all the good things that he's already done for us. And they're not looking at what he's done, they're looking at just what they want. And if they would have went to him and, "Thank you, Lord, for what you've done," could we have something different, or, I can't think that God wouldn't have helped them.
It's almost a spirit of entitlement.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, well, it is almost a spirit of entitlement. Now, we'll see that develop further as they continue their walk.
I don't know what the verse is at, but they wouldn't be going through all this if they had not complained in the first place. It would have only taken them 11 days to get to the wilderness. But they've complained, so now it's going to take them 40 years.
We're going to look at that in more detail, too. Consequences for your mistakes, no doubt. I think the key to what John was saying is there in verse 2. If they would have gone to Him, being God.
In a thankful manner.
In a thankful
we need
manner.
to do. We need to be thankful for what we got, and not just start off complaining in our prayers, asking Him for everything, and not looking back at what He's done for us.
On our worst day as a Christian, we have more to be thankful for than the wealthiest person in the world.
Yeah.
At our worst diagnosis, we have more to be thankful for than the most successful people in this world. Because we have Jesus Christ. And that perspective should color in how we view everything, every element of our life. And that has to transform us. But there in verse 2, the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died out. That's something we see all throughout their history. They're always appealing to somebody, but it's not God. The kings did that later on. They'll appeal to other nations. We can get assurance from them, right? We can have relationships with them. They should have been listening to God. They should have been petitioning God. But they decided to do it their way. And sometimes we can be guilty of doing the same thing. Any other thoughts on this? I don't really want to get to the next one because we won't have time to do its due diligence.
Hey, well, back in Exodus 34, verse 19,
Yes.
there's the word matrix.
34:19.
All that opened the matrix is mine. It just stuck out at me because I didn't expect the word matrix to be in the Bible.
I'd have to look at the original language stuff. New American Standard has the firstborn from every womb. You said Exodus 34:19?
Yes.
Make sure I'm right.
Okay.
The firstborn from every womb belongs to me, and all of your male livestock, the firstborn from cattle and sheep. I'd have to go back and look at that. That is interesting. There's a lot of different interesting words that appear, but we can break them down in more detail. Let me make a quick notation of that. I want to look at that before next week.
Matrix is also the one.
Yes, I want to see. I'll look at several different text families and. Any other questions or comments? We've seen Moses' disposition here in this prayer over where we were in chapter 11 very different than we've seen Moses before this. So I just find that so interesting. I appreciate the comments. Tucker, could you pick out an invitation song?
677.
677. Any comments? I don't want to miss anybody. This is interesting, what we've been looking at tonight. See if I made a note or two. I want to make sure I got through. Exodus 16, if you were taking notes, was whenever we saw the manna come about. I was looking for that earlier. But they're not asking for manna, right? In the passage we looked at, they're asking for meat. Exodus 16, Lord provides manna, and that's the greater explanation of the things that we're reading over in Numbers 11. That's an interesting thing you're going to notice as well, especially when you start studying the Kings. Let me just make this quick shout out. You'll have some, like over in Samuel, where it gives a greater detail on one, and then over in Kings, where it gives a greater detail on another. That's something we noticed in our teen class when we were studying those. So we'll have to, it's important to understand the timeline, which I'm going to try to bring the timeline next week, because that helps us in some of these things. But Also, we can see more or less detail in different passages, sometimes talking about the same thing that happens at the same time. And we see that several examples of that. In closing, it was only a year. Only a year. God had given them everything that they needed. And I truly believe, as John said, if they would have approached God with the right spirit, with the right demeanor, that they could have had a conversation with God in that. And they could have asked for the things that they were wanting. They could have asked for meat, and they could have done it in a lot better way than they did. Instead of complaining and grumbling and going through Moses to do so. They could have asked Moses about these things. But this leads to the question for us, how do we deal through and go through difficult seasons of life? And as we said earlier, a better invitation than I can think of right now, that our worst day on earth as a Christian is better than the best day of somebody who's not. Because we have Jesus Christ. Somebody who came to earth and laid down his life for us while we were still sinners, Paul tells us in Romans, while we were undeserving of grace, the grace that was mentioned earlier, while we were undeserving of the extension of that grace, he extended it to us. And now we have to decide what we're going to do with it. Are we going to pick up the mantle, as we looked at Sunday night, as people go on and continue the work of the Lord? Maybe tonight that you're in a season of life where you're hurting, where you're at a place of difficulty, and it doesn't matter what type of difficulty that is. As a church family, we want to be praying for one another. We want to help one another. And so if tonight there's a way that we can pray for you and go to God on your behalf, as Moses did for these people, we'd love to go to God on your behalf. For whatever struggle, whatever difficulty you're going through, it'd be an honor to lift your name up to the Father. And tonight, if we can do that in some way, we ask that you consider coming as we stand and sing this song together.
Jesus, let us come to